Okay, let's get into this. We're looking at something, well, pretty universal, I think. Something almost everyone does sometimes, maybe without even thinking about it.
Right. Trying to push down or ignore feelings.
Exactly. And how that actually shows up in our lives, often in really surprising ways.
Yeah, our source for this is basically a chapter from a text that really digs into this. It details, I think, 16 specific ways this happens,
hmm
16 signs that those suppressed emotions are, well, surfacing.
So our mission then is to unpack these signs, understand what they're telling us about this habit of emotional suppression, which the source calls pretty ineffective, right? And maybe what it means for us.
It's definitely a fascinating topic because, well, there's that paradox right at the start
What's that?
that suppressing emotions, it's widely seen as, not a great coping mechanism,
Mm.
one of the least effective, actually.
But we still do it all the time. It's like our default setting sometimes.
Exactly. And this source reminds us, emotions aren't just noise. They're signals. They're supposed to be there, designed, it says, to keep you alive and well.
So ignoring them is like, I don't know, ignoring a fire alarm because it's loud.
Kind of, yeah. And the text suggests this happens so much because we often lack sort of basic emotional know-how. It's not treated as common knowledge.
We don't really learn how to feel things properly, so we just learn how not to, or try not to.
We try. But the key point here is you can't actually make feelings disappear. You can only ignore them.
And that's where it gets complicated. The source brings in some science here, doesn't it?
It does. It points to some really classic research that helps explain why ignoring doesn't work. A study from 1988, Daniel Wenger,
Oh, the white bear study.
that's the one,
Yeah.
famous for showing what they call the rebound effect of thought suppression.
Can you remind us how that worked?
Super simple, really, but powerful. One group is told explicitly, do not think about a white bear.
And what happened?
Well, predictably maybe, they ended up thinking about the white bear way more often than the control group who, weren't told not to think about it.
So the very act of trying to push the thought away made it pop up more, like forbidden fruit.
Exactly. And the source draws a direct line from that to emotions.
Oh.
You can try to avoid them, deny them, tell yourself they're wrong, but you can't actually suppress them out of existence.
They just push them down.
You try to ignore them, but they will find a way to make themselves known. The energy's got to go somewhere, right? And the deck says this happens for reasons more powerful than your conscious mind can grasp.
It makes me think of that phrase the source uses. What we resist persists.
That captures it perfectly. Trying to fight or ignore a feeling often just makes it stronger or lets it fester in the background.
So, okay, if we can't just not feel things, if suppression backfires,
Yeah.
how do these unfelt emotions surface?
That's the core of this chapter. It lays out these 16 specific signs. And I think walking through them is really useful because you'll recognize some of these in yourself or just see them around you.
Right, these are the clues, the ways the ignored stuff bubbles up. Where should we start? How about how it affects how we see ourselves?
Good place to start. So sign one is a really polarized self-image. Swings, basically.
What kind of swings?
Like the source says, feeling like you're the greatest person on earth 1 minute and then suddenly feeling like a worthless piece of garbage the next. Very extreme highs and lows.
No stable middle ground. That
Yeah.
makes sense. If you're only letting yourself feel the good stuff and pushing down anything difficult, maybe when that buried stuff leaks out, it feels catastrophic, like total worthlessness.
That seems to be the idea. It's an all or nothing kind of internal state. Then there's sign four, which is related, existing mainly by comparing yourself to others.
So like feeling good about yourself only if you feel you're better looking or smarter or more successful than the next person. Always needing to be the most something.
Exactly that. Your sense of worth isn't internal. It's totally relative, totally dependent on ranking yourself against others. It points to a fragile sense of self that needs that external benchmark.
Maybe because the actual messy, real feelings that make up a person are being kept under wraps.
Could be. And tied into that fragility is sign five. You just cannot tolerate being wrong.
Oh, interesting. Why is that linked to suppressed emotions?
The text suggests it's because making a mistake feels like being completely invalidated as a person. It's not just about the error. It's like if you're wrong about this one thing, your whole shaky self-concept might crumble.
Because it's already unstable from holding back emotions, so any crack feels like a total collapse is imminent.
Right. Any perceived flaw feels like proof of fundamental unworthiness.
Okay, let's shift a bit. How does this suppression stuff play out in, like, our relationships? Socially. The source mentions several things here, too.
Yeah, sign two is Getting really anxious before social situations.
That feeling like you have to put on a show, you can't just be yourself.
Exactly. Feeling you need to perform, not just show up as you are. There's this underlying fear of judgment.
That sounds exhausting. If you're constantly policing your own feelings inside, it makes sense. You'd feel you have to manage your image constantly on the outside, too. You worry the real stuff, the suppressed stuff, might leak out.
Totally. And that discomfort can bleed into how we relate more generally. Sign 10 is preferring to feel superior to others rather than connected.
Superiority over connection. Sounds like a defense.
It often is. If connection means vulnerability, and vulnerability might trigger those difficult feelings you're trying so hard to avoid, well, keeping people at arm's length by feeling better than them is one way to feel safe.
Yeah, keeps things superficial.
And then there's sign 11, which builds on that, having an immediate negative reaction when someone else succeeds.
Instead of feeling happy for them or impressed, you find yourself picking holes in their achievement, finding fault.
Yes, that tendency.
Ouch. Why does that happen? Is it just envy?
Envy can be part of it, sure,
Yeah.
but the source suggests it's more about the discomfort their success triggers in you. If you're suppressing your own feelings of inadequacy, or maybe not pursuing your own potential, seeing someone else shine can be, well, painful.
So it's easier to criticize them than to face your own feelings about it.
It can be, yeah. Less threatening internally. And sign 12 talks about repeating relationship patterns.
Like, you find yourself having the same arguments or facing the same anxieties in different relationships over time, even years later.
Exactly. You think time should have changed things, but the core dynamics, the fears, they just keep popping up. The source says it's because the underlying emotional patterns, the suppressed stuff, haven't actually been dealt with.
The emotional root is still there, feeding the same issues.
Right. History repeats because it hasn't been processed. And sign 14 is related. Feeling like you just can't open your heart to someone.
That deep sense of being closed off even if you want to connect.
Yeah. It's like those unprocessed emotions create these thick walls. Vulnerability feels way too dangerous if feeling itself feels dangerous. So you keep the drawbridge up.
Okay, let's move to some more behavioral things. Mental patterns. Sign 3 is a big one, I think. Catastrophizing.
Oh, yeah. The source gives some really clear examples, like one critical comment from someone sends you into an existential breakdown.
Or a small argument with your partner makes you rethink the whole relationship, turning minor setbacks into absolute disasters.
Right. It's like there's no filter for scale. Maybe if you're suppressing emotions generally, you haven't developed the internal muscle to handle small doses of negativity. So any little thing feels overwhelming, like the worst possible outcome.
That makes a strange kind of sense. What's next? Sign 6.
Random bursts of anger, but over really small, unimportant things.
The classic snapping over nothing, like the pressure cooker finally blows.
That's a perfect analogy. You're bottling up all this other stuff, frustration, hurt, whatever, and it builds and builds until something tiny, totally unrelated, just sets it off.
Okay. And sign 7 is about complaining.
Complaining constantly, yeah. Even about minor stuff. But the interesting angle here is that the source calls it a subconscious desire for other people to see and acknowledge your pain.
Wow. So it's not just negativity for negativity's sake. It's maybe an indirect way of saying, I'm hurting, when you can't say it directly or even admit it to yourself.
That's the interpretation, yeah. A cry for validation of the deeper unacknowledged pain.
What about sign 8? Indecisiveness.
Right. Finding it hard to make decisions, not trusting your own thoughts or opinions, constantly overthinking because you're worried the choice won't be good or right.
How does that link back?
Well, the material suggests it comes from not trusting yourself. If you're constantly overriding or dismissing your gut feelings, your emotional responses, how can you trust your judgment about anything else?
Your internal compass is off, so every decision feels risky.
Exactly. Then sign 9, procrastination.
Everyone's favorite. How is that connected?
The chapter describes it as being in a state of dis-ease with yourself, an inability to just allow flow. Procrastination is often about avoiding discomfort, right?
Fear of failure, feeling overwhelmed.
Or just that general friction that comes from being internally conflicted. If you're fighting yourself emotionally, it's hard to get into that productive, focused state.
Makes sense. Sign 13 is resentment.
Resentment towards people you see as responsible for your pain or your lack of success or your feeling stuck, blaming others.
So instead of feeling yourself like disappointment or frustration with your own situation, you kind of export it and resent someone else for it.
That's a good way to put it, projecting it outwards. And then sign 16, Fear of moving on, even when you intellectually know you should.
Like you know the relationship is over or you should leave the job, but you just can't. You're stuck.
Right. The mind is ready, but something else isn't. The source says it's because you need to completely process the accompanying feelings. The emotional baggage hasn't been dealt with, so it anchors you.
Even if your logical brain says go.
Exactly. The feelings hold you back.
Okay, one more. Sign 15, the spotlight complex. What's that?
That intense feeling that everyone is watching you, that everyone is super invested in what you're doing, how your life is going.
Like you're constantly on stage.
Yeah. But then the source adds this really blunt reality check.
Which is...
They aren't. They're not.
Yeah. Right. People are mostly busy with their own lives.
Exactly. That feeling of being intensely watched often comes from turning your own self-monitoring outwards. If you're constantly judging yourself because you're suppressing things, it can feel like the whole world must be doing it too.
Wow. Okay, so that's 16 signs. And they are incredibly varied, aren't they? From how you see yourself, to relationships, to anger, procrastination.
They really are. But what this material argues so clearly is that they all trace back to that same root cause.
Emotions that aren't felt, aren't processed, they don't just go away.
Nope. They find other ways out. Indirect routes.
Yeah.
Often, pretty unhelpful ways to get your attention.
And that's really the key thing for you listening, isn't it? If you recognize some of these patterns, it's not about beating yourself up.
Not at all. It's just potentially a really valuable clue. An indicator that maybe there's some emotional suppression happening under the surface.
Understanding how it shows up, seeing these specific signs, that's like the first step towards maybe doing something different.
Absolutely. It lets you look past just the symptom, the procrastination, the anxiety, the anger, and ask, okay, what's the underlying feeling here? What's being ignored?
So you're not just dealing with the surface issue, but maybe getting closer to the emotional root.
Right. So you're not just constantly battling the symptoms.
This deep dive then really highlights that trying to just ignore feelings isn't, well, it's not consequence-free.
Definitely not neutral. It has real, tangible effects that ripple outwards in all these ways. This list just gives us some language, some concrete things to look for.
It shows that emotional energy, if you block it in one place, doesn't just vanish, it finds another path. It creates these patterns.
These sometimes baffling patterns in how we act and feel.
Which really leaves us with a powerful thought to consider drawing from this material. If these 16 signs are some of the ways emotions show up when they're pushed down and ignored,
Yeah.
what might it actually look like? What could potentially shift in your life if you started to explore allowing those feelings to just be felt, to be processed instead? What might happen then?